You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Do us a favor and like and subscribe and comment on the video. Subscribe to the podcast on whichever audio podcatcher you're listening to this on. Give it a 5-star review as well. It costs absolutely nothing, but keeps everything free. And if you want more, join the Insiders program and the Subtext link down below. No trolls, 14-day free trial, and the easiest way ever to cancel. So give that a try, and don't forget to check out a second listen on the network. Nearly every team, college or pro, is ready for you. So one thing that's interesting, Christian, looking at what's going on, Ole Miss has players that they're completely unfamiliar with this. This, as Lane Kiffin says, this is the number one SEC team, the number one Pac-12 team, and it's a cross-country classic, yada, yada, yada. He was being funny with that, but he is true that there are players that you just don't know. Now, Ole Miss has transfers from Washington State or having a history there in Kapina Gushigan, and also Deshaun Stribling is in Oxford, Mississippi at the moment. But who are the players now? You mentioned the roster turnover was massive in the offseason with Jimmy Rogers coming over from South Dakota State, where he built a Jackrabbits dynasty in the Dakotas. Who are some of the players that Ole Miss fans need to keep an eye on?
Well, Zevi Eckhouse is the easiest one to bring up just because he leads that entire offense. He loves throwing the deep post. He's not afraid to say that. Every kind of interview you hear from him, people keep talking about what's his favorite route, and he says the post. So if your safeties do a good job at stopping that, I think you can do a really good job at stopping Zevi Eckhouse. And that's something that I do assume that Ole Miss can do. Some of his wide receivers are very impressive. They have had some issues with holding on to the football in some capacity, though. But I think Meredith, the wide receiver for Washington State, is very good. I really like what they have. Joshua Meredith, I should give you his full name. Excuse me on that. He's played some really good football. Carter Pabst is a guy that doesn't really get a lot of the stats as of late, but what I've seen from him show flashes, and we've seen him step up at certain aspects. So definitely like what I see from him. And a guy that had a crazy route to get to Washington State, went through JUCO, went through other things, and that's Devin Ellison, another wide receiver. Hasn't got a lot of snaps so far this season, but's only played just the last 2 games. He could make an impact at wide receiver against Ole Miss. Zevi Eckhouse and the wide receivers are going to be really the only way that they can stick around in this game against Ole Miss. If they do give you a couple surprises, then it'll be one of those good games, in my opinion.
Talk about the offensive line real quick before we move over to the defensive side of the ball. I noticed that you haven't mentioned the offensive line once. Now, if you look at the stats, they seem to pass block pretty well, but if you look at their rushing stats, they don't seem to run block very well. Is this offensive line just a patchwork thing? They're just a Band-Aid to try to get to next season?
Yeah, I think so. Brock DU, their center, is really good, and I think he is the cornerstone, like the one that really holds down this offensive line. But you nailed it right there. They're pretty good at the pass blocking. They do a pretty good job at defending the pass rush. We'll see how that is against an SEC team. They haven't seen a team like a trenches, like an SEC team like Ole Miss, but they've really struggled when it comes to blocking against the run. It's not just the talent that's, in my opinion, there in the backfield. I think there's some issues when it comes to the offensive line. So could cause some issues for Washington State here. I think Ole Miss could have an absolute heyday in the backfield with stopping the running backs, and because of this offensive line. If they do, though, I think it'll be coming off the edge. I think your edge rushers could have a really big day.
Yeah, if you want to look at edge rushers, that is where probably, in my opinion, the biggest advantage that Ole Miss has in this game, the people on the outside coming off the edge, but also whenever Ole Miss is on offense, I think the edge players are a little bit of weakness, especially in the run game for Washington State. You saw Jonah Coleman kind of counter out the gate multiple times in that Apple Cup earlier this season. And with Kewan Lacey being one of the leaders in the country and forcing missed tackles going up against a defense that is not tackled particularly well, this kind of feels like a match made in heaven, does it not?
Yeah, it really does. And I do think that that's something that you need to kind of put in perspective when you are Washington State. Look, you're making a huge trip to the East Coast. You're trying to just have some sort of confidence win here. I mean, obviously a win for Jimmy Rogers would be huge in recruiting, and especially with the new Pac-12 coming in July in 2026, bringing in all those other new teams. If he could find a way to have an impressive victory, that would be one thing. But I think just finding yourself being respectful heading into the fourth quarter, just kind of like what you did against Washington in the Apple Cup earlier this season, would mean tons for a team like Washington State, who's trying to rebuild themselves up to being one of those powerhouses, kind of like what we saw with Mike Leach about a decade ago.
Yeah. And, it's kind of funny because watching video on Washington State, you saw a little bit of the fingerprints of what Ben Arbuckle did when he was at Washington State and all of that. And that makes you think that's the reason they're as good as they are in the pass game, because they have that little bit of a foundation. And once you mentioned that Zevi Eckhouse was there last year and started in the bowl game, that's like, okay, this is a guy that understands what's going on in the pass game concepts that they were doing previously.
Yep, 100%. Look, there's been a lot of really good quarterbacks over the last couple of years coming through Washington State system and then find themselves in really impressive Power 4 conferences. We talked John Mateer right now, Oklahoma. Cam Ward, the #1 overall draft pick, was at Washington State for a little bit of time. I'm not putting Eckhouse in that category. I don't even know if he's an NFL caliber type quarterback, but I will say I think his football IQ is just as high, if not maybe higher. It's the talent level I don't think is just there. But there's a lot of impressive things to see from this Zevi Eckhouse kid, and I think he could surprise a couple folks in Oxford this weekend.
Yeah, is he a guy that Ole Miss can just speed up, that he hasn't seen that type of thing to where he starts seeing ghosts? With him being a third-string quarterback at the beginning of this year, is it a chance that the kind of the same thing that everybody said about Trinidad Chambliss whenever Ole Miss faced LSU? Is this just a little bit faster than his level?
I think it could be, and that wouldn't shock me if that happens. I don't know if we should put a lot of stock in saying that he's the third string quarterback and then he just kind of took over the job. Like, I think that was a mistake on the coaching staff. I think he should have been the starter throughout the entire season. If you hear it from fans and other insiders that cover Washington State, believe that Zevi Eckhouse should have been the starter, and they just went in the wrong direction because Jackson Potter just had a pretty outspoken spring camp and fall camp. So I think that as much as you want to say, well, he's the third string quarterback and that's why he might get sped up, I think that still might happen, but I wouldn't say it's because he just won the job after somebody else performing bad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. And before we get to paths to victory and predictions and all that in the next segment, is this Washington State team, what will they do to try and, equalize what was going on, the talent gap and all of that? Is this a team that all of a sudden will play really slow all of a sudden? Will they try surprise onside kicks and face punt? Is that part of Jimmy Rogers' kind of mindset coming into Oxford?
So far, we haven't seen too many surprises, but there also hasn't been too much games where you're in this kind of situation. I guess the only one you could compare it to would be the Apple Cup, but I think he was just so trying to get this team to play hard-nosed football and step up from the week before when they got smoked by North Texas that you didn't really get to see that shine. I think there's a completely different style here now heading into Oxford. You have a lot more confidence from this team. They know they're going against a tough opponent. They're starting a really tough East Coast trip. After this week, they got to play ranked Virginia as well next week. So it's a tough stretch for Washington State. If I had to put one thing on it, I mean, they would probably have to try their best to control the clock, just to kind of not make Ole Miss have the football longer. And then what I've seen from the last couple times where Ole Miss has won the football games, forcing Ole Miss into third and long situations would be absolutely huge. And some of those close games that you guys have had this past couple this year, 3 of them to be exact, there's only been one time where you guys been 50% or more on third down conversions. I think that would be huge if you're Washington State.
Yeah, we'll see exactly how that goes. When we come back, paths to victory for both teams, predictions of this game, and I will ask him what next year's Pac-12 will look like. So stick around for that when we get back with Christian to see what's up. Anyway. Christian Rao, thanks to him very much. And thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we are the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe me, Google Ole Miss podcast and see how much we come up. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It helps the show and it's completely free. Your support means the world to us. It's another big moment on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV are presenting College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation a long time. Two-time AP Coach of the Year, Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and, of course, Locked On's panel of local experts, a college football preview show that only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. Hotty toddy, and remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.